Story number 1. Witness relocation. I arrived at the safe house outside Billings on the afternoon of March 11, 2024, to relieve Deputy Marshal Hendricks on a pre-trial witness protection detail. The assignment was standard rotation, 3 days on a federal informant named Claire Voss, who was scheduled to testify in a racketeering case out of Butte. Hendricks met me at the door with his go-bag already packed. He walked me through the property layout, showed me the panic button locations, and confirmed the perimeter sensors were operational. Before he left, he mentioned that Voss had been compliant but increasingly anxious over the past 36 hours. She claimed she heard someone walking upstairs despite the second floor being empty and sealed per protocol. I asked if he'd investigated. He said he had swept the upper floor twice and found nothing. All access points were locked and the dust seals on the doors were intact. He attributed her reports to pretrial stress and recommended I keep her occupied with approved media and maintain standard check-in intervals. I signed the logbook and he drove off just after 1600 hours. Voss was in the kitchen when I introduced myself. She was 31 years old, thin dark hair pulled back. She nodded when I told her my name but did not make eye contact. I asked if she needed anything and she said no. I conducted my own sweep of the premises at 1800 hours, starting with the ground floor and then moving to the second story. Every door on the upper level was locked from the outside with a keyed deadbolt. I checked each one. The dust seals were undisturbed, thin strips of paper wedged into the door frames that would tear if the doors were opened. None had been touched. The air upstairs was still and smelled faintly of disuse. I returned downstairs and made coffee. Voss was sitting in the living room with the television on, volume low. I took a position in the adjoining dining area where I could see both the front entrance and the stairwell. At 2100, I walked the perimeter outside with a flashlight. The sensors showed green, no alerts. The nearest structure was a barn foundation almost half a mile east. At 2230, I heard footsteps directly above the living room. They were distinct, measured, deliberate. They crossed from the west bedroom toward the stairwell. I stood and looked at Voss. She was staring at the ceiling, her face pale. I told her to stay where she was, and I ascended the stairs with my weapon drawn. The upper hallway was dark. I turned on the overhead light. All 4 bedroom doors were still closed and sealed. I checked each seal carefully. None were broken. I unlocked the west bedroom and pushed the door open, scanning the interior. The room was empty, furniture covered with sheets, window locked from the inside. I cleared the other 3 rooms with the same result. Nothing had been disturbed. The air temperature on the landing had dropped. I could see my breath. I stood there for almost a minute, listening. The house was silent. I returned downstairs and found Voss standing near the front door with her coat half on. I told her to sit down. She said she wanted to leave. I explained that was not possible and guided her back to the couch. She sat but did not take off the coat. At 23:15, the footsteps resumed. This time they were in the east bedroom, directly above the kitchen. Slow, repetitive pacing. Voss began crying. She said, "He found me." I asked who she meant. She did not answer. I radioed the district office and requested guidance. The duty officer told me to sit tight and maintain position. I asked if there was any history of structural issues with the property. He said he would check and call back. The footsteps moved again at 23:40. They were in the hallway upstairs, crossing toward the stairwell, then stopping at the top of the stairs. I could hear them clearly. Voss stood and screamed. She ran for the door and I intercepted her, using a standard restraint hold to bring her back to the couch. She went limp and stopped resisting. Her eyes were open but unfocused, fixed on the stairwell. She began repeating a name. Michael Ruiz. I checked her case file on my tablet. There was no Michael Ruiz listed anywhere in the documentation. I radioed again and requested immediate extraction and medical support. The dispatcher confirmed a team was en route. Estimated arrival 18 minutes. I maintained my position between Voss and the stairwell, She continued to stare and whisper the name. The footsteps continued during the wait. They moved between rooms upstairs, sometimes in the west bedroom, then moments later in the east, sometimes in two locations simultaneously. I did not go back upstairs. At 0007 hours, I saw headlights through the front window. 2 vehicles. 4 personnel. One was a supervisor I had never met, a woman in her 50s who did not offer her name. She looked at Voss, then at me, and told the medical team to take her. They wrapped Voss in a blanket and walked her to the first vehicle. She did not resist. The supervisor asked for my written logs and body camera. I provided both. She told me to wait outside. I stood by my vehicle for 20 minutes while she remained in the house with one other person. When she came out, she handed me a card with a Helena phone number and told me to report there at 0800 hours. I asked if there would be an after-action review. She said the incident was being handled and I should drive carefully. I was reassigned to administrative duties in Helena the following morning. The supervisor I met there was different, a district chief who told me I would be processing background checks and filing paperwork until further notice. He did not mention billings. I did not ask. 4 days later, I saw an internal memo stating the safe house had been decommissioned due to infrastructure concerns. Claire Voss was declared medically unfit to testify. The case in Butte was dismissed on procedural grounds. My logs and camera footage were never returned. The incident was closed and archived under a reference number I was not given access to. Story number 2. Intake error. I arrived at County General Hospital at 11:30 on a Thursday night to cover the overnight rotation in the emergency department, the 3rd consecutive shift due to staffing shortages across the region. The building was a low brick structure dating back to the early 1970s, expanded twice but never modernized beyond basic code compliance. I had worked there intermittently for 6 years and knew the rhythms of its overnight hours, the long stretches of silence interrupted by sudden bursts of activity that left the small staff scrambling. At 1:15 in the morning, a woman in her mid-60s was brought in by her daughter with complaints of severe abdominal pain and confusion, vitals stable but affect notably flat. The daughter, a woman in her early 40s wearing a grocery store uniform, appeared exhausted and spoke in clipped sentences. She said her mother had been experiencing episodes of disorientation for the past week, sometimes lasting minutes, sometimes longer. The pain had started that evening and would not subside. I took the standard history while the nurse prepared the examination bay. The patient answered my questions in a monotone, offering single-word responses, her gaze fixed on the wall behind me. During the initial examination, the patient became unresponsive to verbal stimuli, but maintained open eyes with fixed pupils, and her daughter insisted this had happened twice before at home over the past week. I performed the standard neurological assessments, checking reflexes and response to light. Everything appeared within normal range except for the absence of any reaction to my voice or touch. Her eyes remained open, unblinking, focused on nothing I could identify. The daughter stood in the corner wringing her hands and repeating that this was exactly what had happened before, that her mother would come back after a few minutes and not remember any of it. I ordered standard neurological protocols and blood work, but when I returned to the examination room 8 minutes later, the patient was sitting upright and speaking fluently in a language neither I nor the interpreter service could identify. The nurse had stepped out to process the lab orders. I stood in the doorway and listened. The cadence was consistent, the phonemes clear and deliberate, but I recognized nothing. I called the hospital interpreter line and held my phone toward the patient. The service representative cycled through 4 different interpreters over the course of 6 minutes. None of them could place the language. One suggested it might be a regional dialect from the Caucasus. Another said it sounded partially Uralic, but the grammar was wrong. The patient continued without pause, her tone neither agitated nor calm, simply steady. The daughter became increasingly distressed, and attempted to leave with her mother against medical advice. But the patient refused to move and continued speaking in the unknown language while staring directly at the cardiac monitor. I stepped between the daughter and the bed, trying to explain that we needed to determine what was causing the altered mental status before discharge was possible. The daughter was crying now, saying she should never have brought her mother here, that this place was the problem, not the solution. I asked what she meant. She did not answer. The patient's voice rose slightly in volume but did not change in tone. Her eyes had fixed on the monitor mounted to the wall, which displayed a normal sinus rhythm. Security was called to assist with the situation, but both officers reported feeling suddenly nauseous upon entering the room and refused to proceed further than the doorway. I had worked with both men for years. One was a former corrections officer, the other a retired state trooper. Neither was prone to exaggeration. They stood in the hallway, one leaning against the wall, the other bent slightly forward with his hands on his knees. They said the feeling had come on immediately upon crossing the threshold. I asked if they could smell anything unusual. They said no. I asked if they felt dizzy. They said it was not dizziness but a visceral wrongness they could not articulate. I administered a mild sedative against standard protocol for undiagnosed altered mental status because the patient had begun repeating a single phrase in English between the foreign sentences. "He is still in the walls here." She said it 3 times. Over the course of 2 minutes, her voice flat, her eyes still locked on the monitor. I told them to wait outside. The daughter heard it and made a sound I can only describe as a stifled sob. I asked her directly who her mother was referring to. She shook her head and would not meet my eyes. I made the decision to sedate based on the need to prevent further escalation and allow for safe completion of the neurological workup. I documented the justification in the chart and administered 2 milligrams of lorazepam intravenously. The patient lost consciousness within 4 minutes of sedation, and upon reviewing her chart, I discovered she had been a surgical nurse at this facility from 1971 to 1994, retiring after an unspecified incident in the West Wing. The record was sparse. Her employment history was listed in the insurance information section, a detail I would have missed if I had not been looking for any prior connection to the facility. I asked the charge nurse if she knew anything about an incident in the West Wing during that period. She said the West Wing had been closed for renovation in the early 90s and was now used for storage. She did not know anything about an incident. I did not press further. I filed the incident report under code 77J and transferred the patient to Regional Medical Center in Lexington by morning with documentation listing acute delirium of unknown etiology. The daughter signed the transfer paperwork without reading it. She thanked me in a whisper and left before the ambulance arrived. I completed my shift at 7 in the morning and submitted the report through the internal system, flagging it for administrative review due to the unusual presentation and the security officer's reported symptoms. I noted the patient's prior employment, but did not speculate on its relevance. The examination room was decommissioned for electrical rewiring the following week, and I was reassigned to day rotation without explanation or review. I received the schedule change via email on my day off. No one from administration contacted me. The room remained closed for 3 weeks, then reopened with new lighting and a replaced cardiac monitor. I never saw the patient again, and her records were transferred entirely to the Lexington facility. My incident report was archived under restricted access, and I was instructed not to discuss the case outside of official channels. Story number 3. Grid inspection. I arrived at the remote substation on the Olympic Peninsula for a routine quarterly maintenance check on the 16th of October 2024. The assignment was scheduled to take no more than 4 hours in daylight. I had performed the same inspection cycle at this location 4 times over the previous 18 months without incident. The access log showed my supervisor had signed in 3 days earlier for an unscheduled inspection. There was no corresponding sign-out entry. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Supervisors occasionally conducted spot checks and sometimes forgot to complete the paperwork. I made a note to mention it in my report. I found the primary equipment functioning normally. Voltage readings were within acceptable parameters. The transformer banks showed no thermal irregularities. The switchgear operated smoothly during my manual cycling tests. Everything appeared routine until I reached the auxiliary building at the rear of the compound. The backup generator was running. I could hear it from 20 yards away, a steady diesel rumble that should not have been present. I checked my tablet for power interruption logs. There had been no outages in the area for the past 6 weeks. The generator should have been cold and silent. Inside the auxiliary building, I discovered my supervisor's vehicle parked behind the structure. The keys were in the ignition. His maintenance tablet sat on the passenger seat, screen dark but still powered. When I activated it, the log entry was incomplete, time-stamped at 9:47 in the morning, 72 hours prior. The final line read, "Auxiliary vault inspection, unusual acoustic signature from." That was where the entry ended. Standard protocol required me to contact dispatch immediately. I returned to my truck and attempted radio contact. Static. I tried my cellular phone, no signal. I walked back toward the main substation building, watching the signal indicator. At approximately 50 yards from the auxiliary building, my phone showed 2 bars. At 40 yards, it dropped to nothing. I marked the boundary with a piece of surveyor's tape on a fence post and returned to my vehicle. I heard what I initially assumed was equipment malfunction. A rhythmic sound, low and regular, resembling breathing or ventilation cycling. It was emanating from somewhere beneath the auxiliary building. I consulted the facility schematic on my tablet. There was a below-grade cable vault installed during original construction in 1998. According to the documentation, it had been sealed after the initial cable runs were completed. There was no maintenance access required or authorized. The vault access hatch was located inside the auxiliary building, set into the concrete floor near the generator housing. I found it standing open. The hatch itself was heavy steel, designed to require 2 people and hydraulic assistance to open per safety regulations. The locking mechanism had been sheared cleanly through. The metal showed no signs of cutting or prying. It looked as though it had simply separated. The breathing sound was louder near the opening, regular, steady, approximately 8 seconds between cycles. I turned on my flashlight and directed it down into the vault. The beam reached perhaps 15 feet before the darkness seemed to absorb it. I could see the upper section of the cable ladder descending into the space below. I descended far enough to confirm my supervisor's service jacket on the vault floor. It was folded neatly, placed on top of his hard hat and safety vest. His boots were arranged beside them, laces still tied. The breathing sound was much louder at this depth. I became aware that my own breathing had begun to match its rhythm without my conscious intention. 8 seconds in, 8 seconds out. I was timing my respiration to something I could not see. I violated containment protocol and withdrew. I climbed back up the ladder, pulled myself out of the vault, and walked directly to my truck without stopping to secure the hatch or shut down the generator. I drove to the nearest ranger station, 11 miles down the access road. I filed an equipment failure report citing gas leak concerns and provided coordinates for a hazmat assessment team. I did not mention my supervisor's vehicle or personal effects. I did not mention the breathing sound or the synchronized respiration. I described only a potential methane accumulation in a below-grade structure and requested immediate area restriction pending environmental assessment. The ranger on duty thanked me for the report and said someone would follow up within 24 hours. I drove home. I did not sleep that night. When I closed my eyes, I found myself counting to 8. My supervisor was officially listed as retired early for medical reasons on October 19th. I received the notification via automated email. There was no phone number provided for follow-up questions. His personnel file was transferred to archive status the same day. I was reassigned to urban substations on October 22nd. The reassignment memo cited operational efficiency and resource optimization. My new territory included no facilities more than 5 miles from a municipal fire department. I did not request an explanation. The Olympic Peninsula facility was reclassified as automated monitoring, only with no personnel access authorized. The access road gate was fitted with a new lock system. The updated facility documentation listed the auxiliary building as decommissioned. The cable vault was not mentioned in the revised schematic. I submitted my quarterly maintenance report with standard language about equipment functionality and regulatory compliance. I did not include the off-protocol observations. Those details went into a separate document that I was instructed to deliver in person to a regional compliance officer whose name I was told not to record. The incident was officially closed on November 1st. My personnel file contains no reference to the October 16th inspection beyond the standard maintenance checklist. The facility remains on the automated monitoring grid. The quarterly inspections are now conducted remotely via sensor telemetry. I no longer work assignments that require me to be alone at remote facilities. This was not a request I made. It was simply how the scheduling began to appear. I have not asked why.